Welcome to the Relationships in Earth Science video with Mrs. Lehnert. I am Mrs. Lehnert. This is not about relationships dating-wise. I know this picture looks like that's what this is about, but we are not talking about those kinds of relationships. We are talking about relationships between different variables on graphs, for example, or in data tables. So just so you know, that's what we're talking about today. You will need your input page for your relationships in earth science. You definitely need your pen or pencil. You may or may not need your notebook. You've noticed that you haven't needed your notebook for this. We will set up our notebook in class the next day. Our objective for this video is that the student will be able to state the relationship between two variables in earth science. Today you will learn about 4 different types of relationships. They are listed here on the video, and they are listed throughout your input page. The first one is a direct relationship. The second one is an inverse relationship, or sometimes people call that an indirect relationship. Same thing, inverse, indirect. Number 3, cyclic relationships. And number 4, independent relationships. So let's talk about a direct relationship first. For those direct relationships, we say as x gets bigger, y gets bigger. X, remember, the x-axis is on the bottom. The y-axis is over here on the side. If you're not going to remember that, I would label that on my input page as well. So for example, as you get older, according to this graph, as you get older, you get taller. So as your age increases or gets bigger, you get taller. So the graph looks like this. On your paper you have a blank graph. You should draw this line that I just drew in red. You should draw that on your input page as well, because that's what it looks like on a graph. And this we call a direct relationship. For an inverse relationship, or again, sometimes people will call this an indirect relationship or an opposite relationship, we would say that as x gets bigger, y gets smaller. So again, x is down here on the bottom axis where the time is spent at the mall, and y is over here on the left-hand side of the graph. That's your money in your pocket, for example. If you're not going to remember, if you have a hard time remembering which is the x and which is the y-axis, I always remember the x is low, the y is high. Y is high. Those two things rhyme, and that might help you to remember. So as an example, as you spend more time at the mall or more time shopping online, for example, the amount of money in your pocket gets smaller, or it decreases. So as I have more time at the mall, so 0, 1, 2, 3 hours at the mall, right? The money in my pocket is going to decrease, right? So let's say I have $0, 1, 2, 3, or 10, 20, 30 if you want to think about it that way. Then as I spend more time there, my money decreases. So make sure that you have drawn the line on your graph on your input page that I drew earlier. Let me draw it back on there again for you. All right, you want to make sure that you've drawn this diagonal line on your graph. Some people find it helpful to put the numbers on the graph like I've done as well. So if you struggle with graphs, I would draw those numbers, write those numbers on your graph as well. And then, just to give you kind of an idea of how I think about graphs, and it might help you as well, it's helped my students in the past. Think about it this way. Let's say I haven't been at the mall for very long, right? Just got there, 0 time at the mall. If you follow that number straight up to the line of the graph and then follow it straight over, that means that I have $3 in my pocket. Okay? But if I spend more time at the mall, let's say I spend 2 hours at the mall, follow that straight up to the graph line, and then follow that over, I only have $1. So you can see that as I go from 0 hours to 2 hours at the mall, so I increase the amount of time at the mall as x gets bigger from 0 to 2, the amount of money in my pocket gets smaller. The y-axis gets smaller. It goes from $3 to $1. So that might help you with graphs. Our third type of graph is a cyclic relationship, like a cycle. I think of it as like a bicycle. A bicycle has a wheel, and cyclic relationships are kind of like wheels. Wheels go around and around and around and around. They repeat themselves. And cyclic relationships repeat themselves. This is a repeating pattern. And most relationships in earth science are cyclic. A lot of them do repeat themselves. So on our graph, we want to draw this kind of squiggly line. It goes up and then down and then up and then down and then up and then down. So you want to draw that graph on your input page. And some examples of these cyclic relationships that we'll see in earth science: the low and high tides. Here in New York City, we experience tides. The water gets higher, the water gets a little bit lower. You might not realize that if you don't pay attention and you don't spend a lot of time near the water, near the river, or near the ocean. We also experience cyclic patterns in our daily temperatures. In the morning, it's colder. It gets hotter during the day, and then it cools back down at night. That's a repeating pattern. Same thing happens with yearly temperatures. It's warm in the summertime, it gets colder in the winter, and then as we get closer to the summertime, it gets warmer again. That's a repeating pattern. And then lastly, phases of the moon. Our moon sometimes looks full, sometimes it gets more like a crescent shape, and then it gets full again. That's a repeating pattern. All right, our last type of relationship in earth science is called an independent relationship. This is when x has no effect on y. It doesn't matter what's happening to x, y is not going to be affected by it. Okay? So this is going to be a straight horizontal line, and it means that one variable has no effect on the other one. So on your paper, on your input page, make sure you draw the graph. Straight horizontal line. By the way, this could also be a straight vertical line. But it would just be stated the other way around, that y has no effect on x. It's actually kind of hard to find independent relationships. We don't have very many of those in earth science. So my example here is kind of weird. They don't seem related to one another, but that's the whole point. As you get older, the number of fingers you have stays the same. So your age has no effect on how many numbers you have. You're always going to have 5 fingers on one hand and 5 fingers on the other hand. Of course, I know that that could change depending on what kind of job you have or what kind of accidents you get in. I understand that, right? Hopefully everybody ends up with 5 fingers on one hand and 5 fingers on the other hand for their entire lives. That's the hope. I'm sure that you will all be fine. Okay, so what we are going to spend time in class practicing is how to state the relationship. And this is the last thing that I'm going to talk to you about today. So the way that we state the relationship between two things in earth science is you take the thing that is on the x-axis. In this case, it's the number of years in school. And then you compare that to the thing that is on the y-axis. In this case, it's the salary expectation. In other words, this is how much money you should expect to make when you get older. Okay? So in this case, this is a direct relationship. I know that because when I look at the graph, I can see that it's increasing from the left to the right. So this is a direct relationship. Okay? And I know that in a direct relationship, as X increases, Y also increases. So the way I would state the relationship between these two things is I would say, as the number of years in school increases, the salary expectation also increases. Or you could say it the opposite way. As the number of years in school decreases, the salary expectation also decreases. So another way to put that, the more years you stay in school, you go to school, you stay and you finish high school, you finish college, you take grad school, which is even more college, then you should expect to make more money. And that's a direct relationship. All right, Earthy, nice job. Now all you got to do is answer that last question that's going to pop up. And remember to bring your notebook and this input page to class tomorrow to get your stamp.